Hello and welcome, dear listeners. You're tuning in to the ReGENERATE project podcast on regenerative agriculture. Join us as we explore new approaches to soil, landscape, and the future of farming. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Your host, Radim Kužel.
Hello, today's guest is Simona Hrochová from Farma Částkov. Your Farma Částkov is an interesting example of what practical, regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and community-supported agriculture can look like in Czech conditions. I would like to discuss with you what this journey looks like in practice, what works, what is the most difficult, and what other farmers or consumers can take away from it. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
Hello, thank you as well.
To start with, how would you describe Farma Částkov in one sentence or a few sentences to someone who has never heard of you?
Well, we are probably a very specific farm because we try to take something from each type of farming or land care approach. Basically, what works for us and helps us farm even in not entirely ideal vegetable growing conditions.
So what do you focus on? What crops do you grow, or what do you actually offer to consumers?
We grow vegetables, fruit, and herbs. Basically, the assortment is typical for the Czech Republic, or for our climate. So from potatoes, carrots, various salads, to currants, gooseberries, herbs. We simply try to maintain great diversity.
So, quite a wide scope. It is actually in a system of permaculture and regenerative agriculture. What brought you to this way of farming?
Permaculture was close to me from the beginning, because it was important for me that it considers not only what I grow, but the whole ecosystem in which I actually live. And regenerative agriculture gradually came to me through permaculture as well, where one aspect is not to plow the soil, which was the initial point when one starts thinking about why the soil should not be turned over. And then, of course, also the fact that we are in an extremely drought-affected area. Around us there are quarries, so the soil is full of gneiss and granite. And of course also the way of farming, where we saw after a year or two that plowing simply would not be the ideal thing we want to do.
So your goal was to retain as much water as possible in the soil, so that you would actually be able to grow vegetables. Is that right?
Yes, to have the smallest possible interventions into nature or into the ecosystem.
What does the course of the year look like for you in terms of rainfall? What kind of climate do you have there?
Normally, it was around 450 millimeters. Last year, we got to less than 350 millimeters for the year, which was a major extreme. And of course, in our area it works like this. Most of the precipitation falls from autumn to spring, and it is normal that in summer it does not rain for 3 months. So for vegetable growers, it is not ideal.
And I assume that in your area, irrigation systems are not really available, unlike in some lowland areas of the Czech Republic.
No, standard irrigation systems are of course not possible here. We do not even have good groundwater, or rather it is not accessible, and the springs are not very abundant either. So it is mainly about the water that comes to us. We also do not have a water supply connection, so for example, we cannot compensate by simply paying more for water consumption. So we retain as much of the rainfall as possible when we can, so that we have some irrigation water, because of course we also grow vegetables in foil tunnels. There, it is simply not possible without artificially supplied irrigation.
And would you say that after a few years, the soil is improving in some way? Do you see any long-term effect on the soil, for example, an increase in organic matter? Or is that something you even monitor?
We definitely monitor it. We also have the advantage that on the first plot where we started about 12 years ago, it began in a conventional way. People didn't know. There was a meadow, so a tractor was ordered, it was plowed, then a rotavator was used, some organic matter was added, but a plow was used in the first years. Whereas the plot we took over about 7 years ago, we decided not to use a plow at all, and we can see that the soil functions much better there. And I am convinced that if we did not use cover crops and did not disturb the soil mechanically so much, we simply would not manage the drought, we would probably have to stop growing vegetables altogether because it would not be possible.
You mentioned cover crops. How do you actually incorporate cover crops into your vegetable growing system? Or, if we think about it, what does a year on your beds look like? What can we find there during the year?
We follow the idea, and I am probably an extremist in this, that the soil surface is naturally supposed to be constantly covered, ideally by living vegetation. So if vegetables that are to be harvested are not growing there, then there is a cover crop. We try to follow the rule that if a bed is supposed to be free for 3 to 4 weeks for vegetables, so that nothing should be growing there, then even for those 3 to 4 weeks we sow a cover crop. Even though it is a short period, because for us it is better, even if the cover crop only grows to 10 centimeters, than if the soil remains bare and erosion occurs.
And how do you choose the cover crops? Are they mixtures of multiple species? How do you mix them?
We aim for diversity, which is something that runs through our entire farming system. Of course, we have tried various mixtures that are commonly used by arable farmers doing regenerative agriculture. But with vegetables, it is a bit more complicated. Also because we use much smaller machinery, so terminating those cover crops is not as easy for us, or sowing into them is also not as simple. So we experimented a lot, testing different mixes. Some crops had to be excluded because we could not terminate them just with a mulcher, and they kept regrowing, which then caused problems for sowing. Of course, there are also crops that germinate well in our conditions because we are in a dry area, so those are included more often. And we sow cover crops almost all year round, whenever the soil allows it and is not frozen.
And which cover crops do well in drought?
In summer drought conditions, we like to include sorghum, rye, and buckwheat in the mixtures. We know these always germinate well, so they are represented more in the mix, and then of course there are other cover crops. In summer, we try to have mixtures with about 8 to 10 components. It depends on what seed we can manage to source.
And when we get to permaculture, how would you explain it to people hearing the term for the first time? What can they imagine under it?
In short, it is a sustainable approach to life. Permaculture is not only about a method of growing food, but also about how we look at life in general and how we behave in it, so that we minimize harming nature through our actions and instead support it as much as possible.
And what do you see as the biggest benefit of permaculture compared to conventional farming? What do you consider the main advantages?
For me personally, it mainly teaches me to think in a way that I use what is available within the farm or ecosystem, and to take as little as possible from other ecosystems, because that is not sustainable. For example, compost. If it were easy, you could just keep bringing in compost and paying for it, but it is simply unsustainable, because as the area expands, the quantities become enormous, or the volume becomes huge.
So, basically making do with what you have where you are.
Yes, to keep it local. Of course, we only keep livestock marginally, and we also produce part of our own compost. But we also have the advantage that we have a friend who has 2 horses. There is also a ranch with horses near us, so at times when they don't have use for their manure, they are happy that we take it away, and we gain organic material from it. But it is still within a fairly local cycle.
And is having a larger number of farm animals something you would consider for the future? Or would you rather stay focused mainly on vegetables and only keep livestock as a side activity?
We spent years moving towards having more and more animals. But of course, a person only has 2 hands and 24 hours in a day. And we realized that with animals, it is typical that when there is the most work, something happens, like a broken fence or another issue that must be solved immediately. Vegetables or fruit can wait, but animals cannot. So in the end, you are never doing everything at 100%. So now we are in the opposite phase, where we are actually slightly reducing livestock so we can focus more on the soil. And I should add that this is also because over the years, we found out that the more we use the regenerative approach, especially cover crops, the less material we need to add for nutrients, even though we are expanding the area. So we realized it is more important to focus on the soil and working with it than to expand livestock production.
Another interesting thing about your farm is that you sell or monetize your production through CSA, which is community-supported agriculture. I think it is still a relatively unknown concept in the Czech Republic, except for a few places. What should a listener or consumer imagine under it?
CSA is basically a kind of mutual cooperation between the consumer and the farmer. The farmer usually has the highest costs at the beginning of the year, but at a time when they have nothing to sell yet. This system was created so that the farmer receives financial support at the time they need it most, without having to go into debt or figure out other solutions, or even risk not starting at all. The consumer knows that, according to the agreement, they will receive a certain number of vegetable boxes with a frequency they choose, and by paying in advance, they partially share in how the farmer operates. Of course, it is not about the farmer then sitting on a bench and saying, "Higher power, sorry, your box is empty," but rather the consumer taking on part of the risk. For example, if hail comes and destroys part of the harvest, they accept that for 2 weeks there will be no tomatoes in the box because it could not be controlled. And later it can be compensated. Maybe a month later there will be more tomatoes or another crop instead.
And for you, it is probably also some kind of income security during the year, right?
Definitely. And for me, it was one of the important factors, that I want to know who I am growing for, know the people, have a certain relationship with them, and at the same time, I did not want to end up in a situation where I harvest a lot of vegetables and have no one to sell them to, and they end up just on the compost.
And currently, does all of your production go through CSA, or do you also sell part of it through other channels?
Only part goes through CSA. This is also because I do not want to expose consumers to the extremes of the weather and make them really feel when something is in very short supply. So we always grow much more, and the CSA boxes get the primary share of vegetables, fruit, and harvest. What is produced in excess is then sold either directly from the farm or people can order it, and a small portion also goes to restaurants.
I am interested in how restaurants view this system of regenerative agriculture and permaculture. Are they restaurants that are interested in it and therefore work with you, or are they also able to market it to their final customers?
In our area, it is still quite difficult with restaurants, because it is of course easier for them to buy from wholesale distributors, where they know they will always get the same assortment every day, regardless of locality or seasonality. So it is slow in our region, but there are also businesses that specifically want seasonality and are able to show it to customers. For example, during zucchini season, they will not offer avocados. And they can cook it in a way that it is not just plain zucchini that nobody wants, but something that actually sells.
Yes, I think locality in restaurants, and also seasonality, is becoming more and more important, especially among chefs who are interested in it. I think it is also increasingly recognized in culinary awards, where sustainability is taken into account more and more, including using as much of the production as possible and minimizing waste. I think that is an important direction for the future, especially considering how much food waste people still produce today. What do you think is the biggest advantage of CSA for the customer?
Based on our customers, many of them say that they would not eat as much vegetables if they had to go buy them in a regular store. It also made many of them start eating vegetables they previously did not eat, or thought they disliked, or never even considered buying. And they also really appreciate, and we hear this often, that they finally get access to seasonality, which is disappearing because supermarkets have everything available all the time. So we can buy raspberries in December and forget that raspberries have their season, just like tomatoes.
Do you also do any processing of your products into final products, like juices, jams, or similar things? Or is it only primary production?
We would like to, but we do not have enough capacity yet.
And what is the relationship of your customers to the farm? Do they also get involved in its operation? Do they help you during the year with tasks on the farm?
It is quite diverse. There are customers whom, to exaggerate, We only know through their application form and payments to the farm account, and they do not want to be more involved. They do not need a closer relationship with us. And then there are people who want to see it. They come to the farm when we have events, either for the public or for the CSA community. They are happy to come. There are also people who tell us that if something is burning and we need help, we should just call them and they will come for a day to help, though they need to rest afterwards because it is physically demanding. So it is very specific.
And what would you say were the biggest limitations or problems during the development of your farm? And on the other hand, when were the moments when you said, "This works. This is great"?
Well, at the beginning, it definitely was not planned that this would become a farm producing so much vegetables and fruit. And of course, what trains us the most is water. More precisely, the lack of water for irrigation. But then there are moments when you are standing in the orchard, most of the trees are in bloom, you see all the birds and insects there, and you realize that despite all the difficulties and obstacles, what you are doing makes sense.
You mentioned blooming orchards. How do you currently deal with night frosts?
Actually, it is not possible there. Or maybe it would be possible, but it would not make sense, to light candles or solve it that way, or to cover the trees with something. That does not work for trees. So we addressed it in advance by planting many different types of trees there, including varieties with different ripening times, which means not everything blooms at the same time. So at least some fruit trees, some fruit, should survive even if something freezes.
So basically it is about distributing the species and varieties well across the season so that you can avoid pressure, whether from frost or pests. Are there currently any pests that are really troubling you? Or, given that the climate in the Czech Republic is changing and temperatures are rising, is there something that affects you more and more?
Yes, for example, with cherries and sour cherries, it is monilial blight, so the trees are maintained by pruning into a more airy canopy, which helps. And of course, we try to make the whole space where the trees are as resilient and alive as possible, so that pests also have natural predators there, which helps. We have also applied predatory mites and similar biological controls, so we help ourselves in that way.
Is there actually enough available solutions on the market for you, in terms of biocontrol agents or biological pest management? Or do you rather rely on nature than on purchased products?
Well, I probably have a complete aversion to any spraying, so that is also why we sometimes did not even use neem oil at the beginning, for example, against aphids on peppers in the greenhouse, because only my husband could do it. For me, it was too big an intervention. So we found out that by not intervening and just letting things be, we actually supported the health of the ecosystem, and it managed on its own. Of course, it is a constant balance so that you do not lose everything, and the damage stays small. It is like with the Colorado potato beetle. If there are not too many of them, they do not reduce yields. On the contrary, a small amount of feeding on leaves can even help by reducing the risk of fungal diseases. But it is a constant balancing act.
A constant balancing act, but one you manage to keep in balance.
We try to.
Okay. If someone wanted to start growing vegetables in your way, what would you recommend they focus on at the beginning? Or what should they avoid?
I would mainly recommend that they study enough information in advance, because since we were learning as we went, we made more mistakes than people would today, when there is more information available and continuous learning. So sometimes it is better to read more, listen more, and only then start. And I would definitely recommend focusing more on cover crops, or what is now called green manure, because although it is more complex in agriculture in terms of timing and selection, when you see what a simple thing like sowing cover crops does to the soil and to nature as a whole, it is worth it.
I think cover crops should definitely be part of every type of farming, whether arable or vegetable production, because of the many benefits they bring to the system. Regenerative farmers are now appearing more and more in the media, and there are also various awards. You received the Top 50 Farmers Award. What does this award mean to you? Is it some kind of validation?
It means a lot to me because when I heard from Karel Kalny that he nominated me, I internally thought he had either gone crazy or was joking because I felt I did not belong among those nominees. Especially because we farm about 5 hectares, which in the Czech Republic is not even considered the definition of a farmer, more like a gardener, even though growing vegetables on a small area is not easy. But in the end, I decided to go for it, filled in the nomination, and did not expect to get selected, so I am grateful for it.
And does this award bring you anything in everyday life or in contact with customers? Has anyone contacted you because they saw you received the award?
Yes, it definitely has those kinds of benefits. After we could publicly announce that we were among the top, many people reached out who already knew we were growing vegetables and how we do it, and they wanted to start buying from us after we made it into the top 50.
And when I move to the topic of the brand of regenerative agriculture, although it is not really a brand, do you think it would help or harm if there were some kind of certification framework, like in organic farming? Or do you think it might slow down or weaken regenerative agriculture?
Well, I think that in recent years there have been so many certifications that even consumers no longer know what each one means. I am not only talking about organic or biodynamic labels, but many different labels, and people get lost in them. And I am not someone who is in favor of certification at any cost, because for me the most important thing is that the customer trusts that you farm the way you say you do. Not that someone who does not know you comes, whom you hire and pay, and then gives you a stamp. That alone is not enough.
Definitely. Organic farming is probably the biggest example. Most customers now understand what it means, but there are many other certifications. What do you think is needed for your farming model, permaculture and regenerative agriculture, to spread to more farms in the Czech Republic? Does the state need to help in some way?
I think the main thing is that farmers need to see that it is a functional model. With regenerative agriculture specifically, people are often initially against it, whether organic farmers or conventional ones, saying that cover crops are an unnecessary expense. I think the initial impulse should come from farmers themselves, because they need the soil, and they should change their mindset so that soil is not just a sponge you pour inputs into and then harvest and sell, but something you actually take care of. I also think part of the problem is that there are few landowners who actually farm their land, and many farmers work on rented land, and those landowners often do not care how the soil is managed.
Although on the other hand, some landowners are starting to take more interest. There are initiatives that educate them to care about their soil. Do you own your land, or do you also lease some? And do you talk with landowners about this?
We farm only our own land, so we do not lease anything, so this is not an issue for us. But we do know people in the area who lease land, and we try to tell them that they should at least want to know how the farmer who works their land is managing it and what they are doing, not just lease it and end there.
And regarding other regenerative farmers, are you in contact with others? Do you exchange information? Or do you organize meetings?
Meetings are usually organized under the umbrella of Živa půda, where regenerative farmers gather. And of course, there are a few regenerative farmers, like Karel Kalny or Sebastian Ale, with whom one stays in contact. And it helps maintain the feeling that what you are doing makes sense.
And if I think about it, you also mentioned that it is important for someone who wants to start farming to gather information. Where do you currently get your information? Or what are you focusing on right now? Where would you like to move your farm in the future? What topics are you interested in? What are you dealing with at the moment?
Right now, we are mainly dealing a lot with the composition of cover crops, because since we do not use any synthetic sprays or fertilizers, we only use a mulcher for termination. We do not have any other way to mechanically terminate cover crops, so we are trying to educate ourselves more in this area, especially in crops that can be terminated easily. And of course, also in making sure we have enough knowledge about the crops in the cover crop mixtures, what each plant actually does to the soil, so that the mixtures are really carefully thought out. Not just, let's put this in, it might work, but something much more deliberately designed.
And do you also use nitrogen-fixing crops in your cover crop mixtures?
Yes, we do. We often use hairy vetch, for example.
And do they perform well? Especially considering you mentioned short-term cover crops. Do these crops work in shorter periods, or do you mainly use them in longer ones?
When it comes to nitrogen-fixing crops, we do use them, but again, it depends on rainfall, mostly from autumn to spring. Because in summer, when there is a long dry period, we have found that it is very difficult for seeds like peas or field peas to germinate. And then the peas are almost absent, or other crops outcompete them. So we adjust it like this.
And do you also see cover crops as part of weed control, in terms of soil coverage? Do you observe that effect?
Definitely yes. We use them for that. For example, when we see that a field is more weedy after harvest, we increase the number of species in the mixture, rye, sorghum, oats. And they work very well and later help reduce weed pressure.
And to conclude, what would you like listeners to take away from this conversation? What should consumers focus on in the future when choosing where their food comes from?
I would wish that consumers think more about what they eat and where it comes from. And if possible, that they want to know who produces it, and try to get to know them or at least understand how they farm. I do not mean they have to become friends, but at least to look up the information, even if it is more complicated. And through this approach, farmers will also be more motivated, or pressured, to change their practices and use regenerative approaches more.
And if I, as a consumer, wanted to find a farmer or vegetable grower, is there any website or platform where I can find someone in my area?
Yes, definitely through Jivapuda or ReGENERATE. Farmers who want to make their work visible can definitely be found there. And I think that nowadays with social media, it is even easier. You can find smaller farms or through recommendations someone might tell you, and you might not even realize that there is a regenerative farmer in the next village.
So, social media is important for you as well in terms of sales. It is widely used today across all kinds of businesses. Everyone who sells anything uses it. I am not sure how to put it. So, is social media important for you?
I would not say important, but we use social media to show how we farm, and that it can be done differently, because it is a platform where information can reach a relatively large number of people easily. And it is important to show it to as many people as possible.
But it takes a lot of time. Or can you still manage it within your daily schedule?
It takes a lot of time, so I usually do it while moving from one field to another, or during short breaks, so that I do not lose time that I need to dedicate to the soil.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the interview. For anyone who wants to follow Farma Částkov, you can find them on Instagram and follow their journey. Thank you, and I wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you.
Project ReGENERATE is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the authors only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor the Executive Agency can be held responsible for them.